Alright, before I start this bit of lore, I'm going to have to discuss a little bit about events that happen throughout the lore of D&D Earth, because not all the Titans are created at the exact same time. Titans kind of came into existence at different points on the timeline. So, in this particular bit of the lore video of me discussing this, this is going to jump around like a lot, just to let you know. So, spoilers ahead. Also, keep in mind, if you are one of my players and you are watching this video, of course, you understand it as the player, but your characters will not understand this quite yet, until we either get to that, section of the lore or not. It depends on what you guys like to do. I know what my boys will usually like to do, so it depends on what they like. But anyways, let's just roll right into the lore. Now, I have to mention before, in the previous section of the lore, that some animals were drawn to places of high radiation and basically fed on that radiation. Well, this process was actually happening ever since the Carboniferous period, around 300 million years ago. This was when a single Meganeura and Mesophile would constantly feed on this radiation until they were forced underground due to the natural forest fires that were happening around that time. So these two insects would become the first creatures to ever enter within the Hollow Earth. And all you need to know about the Hollow Earth is that it's basically this, in-between kind of mess. Like, the Earth has its own crust, right? But people theorize that there's just like this other world in the center of the Earth. So, I guess you could say that these two animals took a journey to the center of the Earth.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But yes, these were the first two animals to fully to fully acclimate themselves within the Hollow Earth. And they would eventually hibernate and later evolve into the two titans known as Megagurus and Kumunga, respectfully. The next set of titans wouldn't be up until right near the Permian Extinction, around 253 million years ago. At around this time, a Scutosaurus would find a place to feed on this radiation before the extinction happened, where, much like Megagurus and Kumunga, it would go into the Hollow Earth and later become the titan known as Baragon. However, Baragon wasn't the only one to go into the Hollow Earth, because at this same time, a new breed of parasitic titans had been evolving with the other occupying titans. And presumably, Baragon was probably the one who brought these parasitic titans into the Hollow Earth. It's still not completely confirmed yet. But these parasitic titans would feed on the the sleeping titans, and would later become the two known titans, Shirimunda and Muto Prime. After the Permian Extinction, the time of the dinosaurs would begin. And this is when the long list of animals would eventually come into the Hollow Earth. Starting from the late Triassic period, a Kuaniosaurus would eventually become the titan known as Varon. Later on, in the late Jurassic period, an Allosaurus and a praying mantis would, feed in the same area, and then later become Gorosaurus and Kamacrius, respectfully. However, within the Hollow Earth, Kumunga would awaken from his slumber, only to push Gorosaurus away from Kamacrius, which ultimately, by the end of that fight, Gorosaurus was stomping away in defeat, as Kumunga and Kamacrius would be sleeping next to each other. Now, finally, for the Cretaceous period, to start this off, an Edmontonia would be the first to go into the Hollow Earth and would eventually evolve into the Titan known as Anguirus. Next would be a Pteranodon, which, weirdly enough, decided, oh, I'm not going to go bury myself under the ground like everybody else. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go straight into a fucking volcano. That sounds like a great idea. In which, of course, while it was feeding on this radiation, the volcano didn't kill him. Which, normally, for any other Pteranodon, it would immediately kill them and incinerate them. But no, for this particular Pteranodon, he literally slept in volcanoes after he fed on enough radiation to do this. And so, being within a volcano, his body would completely harden to protect himself from, the lava that was in there. And and this Pteranodon would eventually evolve into the Titan known as Rodan. Next, a butterfly and a moth would be basically fighting in the same exact space. However, the butterfly would be nearly killed by the moth, as the moth would continue to feed on the radiation and tucker into the Hollow Earth and becoming the Titan Batra. The butterfly would have died if it weren't for a T-Rex entering the area, and instead of killing the butterfly, which it should have, the T-Rex actually nursed the butterfly to a point where the butterfly could physically move physically move into the Hollow Earth, and would later become the Titan known as Mothra. And of course, the T-Rex would basically follow the butterfly into the Hollow Earth once the KT event happened, and would become one of the most powerful and strongest Titans the Earth has to offer. Gojira. So, yes, after a good majority of the Titans basically just, fed on the radiated areas and decided to hibernate within the Hollow Earth, that was the good majority of them. However, this wasn't always the case for this, but 3 would continue to go on this process. So, around 10 million years ago, gorillas would again be feeding on an area of radiation and make their way into the Hollow Earth. However, the problem with this was the gorilla group apparently split between 2 different species. One being the gigantic Titan-sized Kongs, respectfully, and a sort of dwarfed version of these Kongs, which would, give them a relative to the Kongs themselves. But this was also it's worth noting that the Gojira species fought against the Kongs while they were in the Hollow Earth evolving together, in which both sides lost a lot of members to their species, leading to basically the Kongs going onto the island surface that would be known as Skull Island. But as mentioned in the previous section of the lore, the prehistoric section, Skull Island would be this island where, yes, it had dinosaurs on it, and they were constantly evolving. However, Skull Island had a surprise for the Kongs waiting for them, and this is the island that first created what Monarch would describe to be lesser Titans, which are, like the name suggests, Titans, but they're not exactly on the same level as a regular Titan. They're just they're lesser size and lesser strength, but they're still gigantic enough and powerful enough to kind of rival a regular Titan if they could. And this first lesser Titan would be known as the Skull Crawlers. And these skull crawlers would eventually decimate not only the wildlife on the island, but would also completely destroy the Kongs, much like the Gojira species did to them in the Hollow Earth. However, this time, the skull crawlers would overwhelm them, leaving one final member to maintain the entire island, which, that being Kong. And of course, most of the dwarf species were also killed, but then again, later on, King Kong would be there, and well, I think we all know how that story turns out. Now, while those events would play on much later, there are two more Titans that originally went into the Hollow Earth. Around the same time as those gorillas did, a lone lobster decided to make its way from the ocean to the Red Sea, where it would eventually, feed on the radiation on the ocean floor, making its way into the Hollow Earth, and eventually evolving into the Titan known as Ebra. And then finally, in 10,000 BCE, an American mastodon would make the unusual journey to what would become the Amazonian rainforest in South America, where it would basically, once again, feed on the radiation, go into the Hollow Earth, and eventually become the Titan Behemoth. Now, this is all what a good majority of all the Titans originally went to evolve into what they are now. However, two other Titans took two different paths to originally become the Titans they are known for. The first Titan, Manda, came into being much the same way as all the other mythologies did on Earth, with Manda later earning the title, the father of all dragons. But again, that is a much bigger story that I will be discussing later on, in a different video on itself. The final Titan I will be discussing today actually doesn't start his origin story until the year 1945. Just think about this for a minute. So in 1945, obviously the Americans were testing nukes at the time. And while they were testing nukes on the neighboring islands around the US, a marine iguana would basically later feed on this radiation from the nukes and would eventually evolve into a new version of Gojira, like a subspecies of Gojira, in which the New Yorkans that would later get attacked by this thing much later on, they would call it Godzilla, but everyone else, making sure, that's because that's confusing, since Godzilla was already a thing at this time. They didn't want to confuse it with Godzilla, so they instead named Godzilla, well, they kept Godzilla. Yeah, but for the New York Godzilla, a lot of people would eventually dub this Gojira species as Zilla. And now that is basically all the Titans I'm going to be covering, and I've discussed pretty much most of them. Outside of a few minor ones, there's not a whole lot else to really discuss here for now. So I'll be done for today. Now, I know I have to apologize again. These videos do take a while to get done because, I'm trying to make it so that it's easily explained to everybody, so that everyone has a good understanding as to what is going on in this universe. But, as always, and I'm going to say this every time, if you guys have any questions about the D&D Earth lore, feel free to, leave a comment down below. Let me know what your question is, and I am completely open to answer those questions. So feel free. Don't hesitate to ask if you're confused by anything. And until next time, guys, I am the DM.